Welcome to the Lady Landlords podcast, where we empower women to gain financial independence through real estate investing. I'm your host, Becky Nova, founder of Lady Landlords. If you're ready to buy, manage, and grow your real estate portfolio, then let's get started.
Do you know all the hidden costs that you need to make sure that you are factoring into your deal analysis to ensure that you are making money when you buy rentals? If you are not sure, that is what we're going to be diving into on today's episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. One of the reasons I wanted to do this is, as you may know from our Lady Landlords Facebook community, I am about to close on a new property. So I've been going through doing my own deal analysis, making sure to be checking my numbers over these past few weeks as I've been going through this process. And it has been about a year since I've actually bought a property. And over that year, it's just interesting going through this process again, thinking about all those little costs that I feel like nobody tells you about when you buy a property. And I feel like I see this often in the Lady Landlords Facebook community. I often see people saying, well, the mortgage will be $1,000, I can rent it out for $1,200, therefore, woohoo, I make $200. And when I see that, I normally see, like a few months later, people being like, oh my God, I'm not making any money. There was this repair, there was this vacancy, I'm losing money here. And I see women getting then stressed out because of this. So I put together a list of just all the costs that I have been going through with buying now this next property. And wanted to just share these with you, right? And the idea here is not to scare you, not to deter you, but to really prepare you and make sure that you have all of your numbers in place when moving forward with your purchases. Because in order to make sure that we are accumulating that cash flow, make sure that we are growing what that is, we really want to make sure that we have all of the costs actually included, okay? So, listen, you're already spending time either looking for properties with a realtor, knocking on doors, sending mailers, whatever that may be. Once you're able to finally acquire that property and get your accepted offer, that's really where costs start. So one of the very first costs is going to be a little bit state dependent and also a choice dependent, which is your attorney's fees. Certain states you do not actually have to use an attorney in order to have your real estate closing. In states like where I am in New York, they are required. So that already gives me a good couple $1,000 bill just right off the bat, even to just get those contracts out, which in a state like New York, in order to really secure that property, you have to have that contract in place. So there's no way around getting through that attorney fee. Over the years and the other 16 properties I bought, I got to say attorney's fees can really vary greatly. So it is very important to make sure that you're asking attorneys what their fees are, how they work, and what that looks like there so you can have that approximate cost. I personally, when you find somebody that you like working with, stick with them. Continue to use that person, and it's great because now you can already start to put those fees into what your costs are going to be. Another fee that usually comes up around the same time is your inspection. If you are choosing to do an inspection on a property, that once again, you're probably looking under $1,000 for most properties, depending on your location. But it is usually going to depend if it's a single family, if it's a multifamily, the size of the property, what else might be included in that. What's crazy is that with inspections, it's not just the inspection itself. Sometimes there's extra add-ons that might make a little bit of a difference, and there might also be certain types of inspections that you might have to do that you haven't done before. So do make sure to factor that in when you're doing your deal analysis. For example, are you having a termite inspection? Are you doing radon testing? I most recently, this was actually the first time in all the properties that I own that I had to do this, but I also had to do a sewer scope, okay? Sorry, not a sewer scope, a septic scope. What was interesting about that is most of the times when I bought properties, everything that I own is in cities on sewers. This was the first time I actually had a septic tank, and that was a learning curve for me. And also the extra cost of that, also looking a little under $1,000 in my area, to also have that cost there. There was the option to even do a chimney inspection as well and bring out somebody different. So if you're doing termites, if you're doing radon, if you're doing a septic scope, if you're doing a chimney scope, If you have to do a gas inspection, those are things, I've seen that done. We have a lot of gas tanks that are buried in the state of New York, and at least in my area in New York, and that is something that could actually take an extra cost as well. All of those extra costs, that could really add up to a good extra couple $1,000s, and you really want to make sure that you're factoring that in at the very beginning, so that way you can calculate what your ROI is going to be. Within that, if you are getting a loan, most likely you're going to have an appraisal fee, right? And that, it sounds like now you're moving along, there's no way to really get around that. That is something that you're just going to have to do. So you're also looking probably under $1,000 for that appraisal fee. But when you talk to your lenders, you want to learn, what are the origination fees? How much is this loan going to cost me? What are any types of recording fees? I remember the very first property that I bought, when I knew none of this. I knew nothing of what to expect. Nobody told me these things. Nobody shared any type of list like this with me. But when I was going through that, what I thought was, I remember calling my lender. I was on a New York City bus going down like Fifth Avenue, and I called my lender and I was like, what are these fees? There's a recording fee. There was a FedEx fee. There was a fee to be able to like mail things between people. And I'm like, where are we mailing and what are we mailing? Why is this costing me a couple $100? There was copying fees. And I understand that a lot of those things might not still be negotiable, but some of them actually can be. I thought it was very important to understand what those fees were on that document that I was going to be paying, because once again, those were not anything that anybody had mentioned to me. It was really, no, just buy a house, pay mortgage, and then be able to move forward. The other two items that really kind of fit within these closing costs kind of topic that we're on right now is that idea of also insurances. First off, title insurance. Okay, title insurance, incredibly important. I have a whole other episode on the Lady Landlords podcast all about the importance of that title insurance and really ensuring that the property that you're buying is actually being sold by the person that says that they own it. I cannot stress that enough and how important that is. Title insurance is not always the cheapest. You need to make sure that you are factoring in what the cost of that is. In certain states, you cannot buy, you cannot close without that title insurance in place. So those are costs that you want to make sure that you understand up front. Title insurances come from companies, which once again have different rates, have different fees, and it's important to be able to have some conversations with that. Normally, when you go through an attorney, the attorney really handles everything with title and handles that piece of it. It does not have to be that way. You can absolutely talk to your attorney and say, I want to use this title company. This is the title insurance that I want to be able to go with. And that is something that can be negotiable because you can also go through that. In title insurance, often a survey is required. Sometimes you might get lucky and there's a very recent survey. Otherwise, you might have to pay also for a new survey. I know most of the surveys that I've done, I think have been between about $1,500 to $2,000. That, once again, that is an extra cost that all of a sudden you're sitting here being like, I thought the down payment, I thought the closing costs were going to be my impact. And a lot of people will often say in Lady Landlords, oh, I'm saving for my down payment. But ladies, to be honest, it's more than just a down payment. We need to be thinking about all of these other costs here. Really, with that down payment, you could be putting down anywhere from 0% down to 25% down unless you're buying 100% in all cash. Closing costs, I usually try to average out about 3% of what the purchase price is going to be. That to me will really get to that space of my best predictor of what is going to be able to cover those costs. So now you're kind of ready to move forward, but the other insurance that's in there is now either a homeowner's insurance, if you're going to be living in a property, or then the landlord insurance, if this is a property you're going to be renting out. Now, insurance is a very hot topic right now. I know in many states, including where I purchase in New York, insurance costs have increased dramatically over time. This is something that you really want to make sure that you can get an accurate estimate, because to me, it's such an interesting backward situation, not just with the closing costs, but even with insurance, that usually you get the property, you have it under contract, you do the inspection, you're going through the process, you're getting the loan, and yes, in order to close, you need to have your insurance bound, right? You need to have that policy put in place. But what's interesting is usually it's kind of a little bit of a chicken or the egg scenario, where the decision is, well, you need the house to be able to get the insurance quote, but you need the insurance quote in order to close on the house. So there does tend to be a little bit of sticker shock. And I've been noticing this in Lady Landlords. We've talked about this also in our inner circle, that to be honest, right now in certain states, the cost of insurance is absolutely blowing up deals, okay? So make sure that you have a great insurance broker on your team. Make sure you can start to get some of those numbers, because to be honest, it's not always just the insurance. Sometimes you might end up needing a special type of also insurance, meaning flood insurance. That, especially in certain states right now, I'm looking at you, Florida, insurance is a very limiting factor when it comes to being able to buy properties. When then purchasing that property, you also have to think about, how is this impacting the rest of your portfolio? Is this now changing what your umbrella policy is going to look like? Is this going to impact what the cost of that is going to be? I know personally, the house that I'm actually about to close on is going to be for my primary residence, okay? So I'm excited. I get to move to a new neighborhood. I get to move to a new town. I'm looking forward to that. But when I do that, I'm not selling where I currently live. I'm going to be renting that out, which means that now is going from my primary residence to a investment property, right? So now I'm going to need to make sure that I have my landlord policy there, and then now I need a new homeowner's insurance policy. All of that, which is under now my umbrella policy as well. So by picking up this rental, by picking up this primary residence, it's not just now, okay, well, what is the insurance I need on this property? But I also have to factor in, how is that impacting my costs? How is that making a difference in what I'm going to have to pay for all of the properties together as well? That might make a bigger impact, and that's going to cut into what my cash flow is. And I need to think about that before I end up buying the property. The other item within insurance that I often hear people, when they just do these quick calculations about what monies they're going to make on properties, they tend not to include taxes. Taxes, once again, depending on where you are, and me being in New York, maybe I'm a little bit more sensitive to it, but taxes and insurance can absolutely change a deal. If I didn't have to worry about taxes or insurance, there would be so many more deals out there. There'd be so much more cash flow to be able to have. But that's just not the case. These are the things that we just have to be able to pick up. So make sure that you also are including your taxes in your deal analysis. And it's important to also know if your taxes are going to change on the closing. What I mean by that is, in certain places, and this isn't even necessarily state specific, this could actually be town specific, but when you are buying a property and it is reported, hey, the taxes on this property are, let's use easy numbers here, $5,000. But if now all of a sudden when that property closes, does it get reassessed by the town? If it does, and that property has not been assessed in years, and there's been work done to it, well, now all of a sudden your taxes might go up to 6, 7, who knows what number it's going to be. So it's important to also understand if that is a change that you should be expecting, and then you want to calculate that new number into your deal analysis, not the old number, because you could literally be off by thousands of dollars if you do not include that there, okay? So taxes, insurance, make sure that you're really understanding the process for that in the location of where you're buying. Within that, start thinking then also about the utility setups. I see this often where people will say, oh, I'm buying a duplex, so the tenants are paying their own utilities. Well, we got to think this through a little bit more. For example, are there any landlord utilities? I know personally in my multifamilies are really set up kind of like apartment style setting, meaning you come in one common door, which means there's an exterior light. There is a stairwell, which has exterior lights, which is heated because we're in New York. And then there's all the apartments off that. So even though the tenants might be paying their utilities in their assigned apartments, I, as landlord, am still paying for that electric, for that exterior light. I am paying for the hallway light. I am paying for the gas to heat that hallway. All of those different factors need to be included and really thought about, right? Also, with water usually is something that is going to be attached to the property itself, okay? So that is something that I actually include in my rent, that water, because that comes through the city. Once again, we're talking sewers over here. So with that idea of having that in, I need to make sure that I have those costs that I am still going to be paying. So I don't know when I'm going to get that water bill. That's something that I'm going to find out at the time of closing. So it's important to make sure that you have those extra reserves. We should not be investing every single penny we have, because we also have to account for those costs. Now, not everybody is going to have that situation. There's going to be certain utilities that are going to be able to put on the tenants. But if you're buying a property that's vacant, who are those costs on? You. So those are things that you're going to have to still factor in and then say, hey, I have to still keep the water on. I have to keep the electric on, the gas on. It's cold where I'm buying right now, and it's winter, and I'm not going to have tenants for maybe another month or two, but you're still going to have to pay to heat the place. So having those costs and being aware of what that's going to look like with those carrying costs is going to be important. With those carrying costs, also, if you are going to have a vacancy, you need to decide what that's going to look like. Now, we are not talking about rehab. Rehab is a whole different thing. Clearly, you're going to need the money for whatever rehabs you're going to have. But depending on what your vacancy rate average is, the average days on market for your area, you have to make sure you can say, yeah, I can pay the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, the gas, the electric, all of those different things for 30, 60, 90 days, whatever is average before you're going to be able to get tenants in there. So factor in those costs and really think hard about that vacancy rate when you are doing your deal analysis. Within that space of trying to get those tenants in and how to prepare for that, you might not need this for closing, but you want to start thinking about what are those immediate things that you're going to have to do to get the property rented. Now, once again, not rehabs. Rehabs, those are larger costs you're going to have to think about and plan out. We'll save that for a different episode here. But, for example, the property that I'm buying now, it's in great condition. I don't have to do rehab, but the whole thing needs to be painted. I always update the locks and change those. I also am a huge fan of electric locks, right? There's those little tweaks that need to be made. Do I have to buy that pack of light bulbs? Do I have to find then a ladder to be able to change the light bulb in the chandelier? All of those different costs, I really want to think through and logically walk through. Cool, I'm closing, I get keys. How do we move forward from there? I actually bought a property back in 2023 that had no keys. I was at the closing, signed all the paperwork, paid all this money, and then was like, okay, great, thank you very much, sellers, thank you very much, attorneys. I'm very excited to get these keys so I can go, take care of this apartment complex here. And they were like, oh yeah, by the way, seller hasn't had keys for years. Okay, so what was my first phone call? All of a sudden I had to call a locksmith to be able to now change these locks, to be able to get me keys. And that was a very interesting situation. And that for a small multifamily building, that's going to cost quite a few $100s. So things that you want to be able to think about there, just those little extra costs so you can be prepared for that. If I couldn't get keys, if I couldn't get locks, I can't get that property rented, right? I couldn't get that money coming in. So that's definitely something that you want to consider. Also, if there's any types of furnishings or appliances that do not come with the house, okay? And once again, this is state specific. In certain states, you do not need to provide these. So you might not need to provide a fridge, a stove, anything in that space for your tenants. In certain states you do, absolutely typical practice in the state of New York. Washers and dryers, not really typical in my space, okay? To be honest, in New York City, if you have a washer and dryer, that's usually like a luxury rental. Those are like the rich people that actually have a washer and dryer. But that's not a very typical thing to still have in our spaces. That's something that most people in New York City, we're sending out our laundry. We're sending those things to other people to do. So I don't have to think about those costs. But if I then, when I switch to buying outside of kind of that city area and started buying about an hour north of New York City in the Hudson Valley, washers and dryers are completely normal. Window coverings can make a difference. Needing lawn equipment, providing anything like that, depending on who is taking care of that responsibility. Once again, most of my properties are multifamilies, which means snow removal, landscaping, all of those types of things do fall on me as the landlord. And those are things that you want to make sure to fit in there, okay? Kind of switching back to a little bit more of those decisions that you would want to be able to make as a landlord is you might also choose to be setting up an LLC. That's something that, once again, make sure to talk to your attorney and your accountant about what's best for you. I personally am a huge advocate for using LLCs to protect myself from liabilities with my properties. We have another episode on the Lady Landlords podcast all about that and how that works and why it is important, and to be honest, how not to screw that up. But there are costs to that. For me, it usually takes about $2,000 to be able to set up what that LLC is going to look like. There are absolutely ways to do it cheaper, but that's the route that I tend to choose. And then also, that's going to be yearly costs to file my taxes for the LLCs. In certain areas, you also have to register as a landlord, and that might be an annual fee, especially if you're doing midterm rentals, short-term rentals. I know California also has similar policies. I think there's some places down in Georgia that do as well, Oregon, Washington State. So you really want to make sure that you are understanding what are going to be those annual costs that you're going to have. What are you going to need to do, and what costs are you going to have before you can even get this place rented out? Maybe you buy in an HOA area. If that is, that's also another cost that you're going to have to pay. There might be fines, there might be inspections that also need to take place. There might also be updates that you're going to have to do purely due to that HOA. So you want to make sure that you are really speaking with an attorney to get and understand all of those things, okay? Now, I probably freaked a bunch of you out that are listening to this right now with those fees. And once again, I want to make sure that you are thinking back to this of, I am here sharing these items because I want you prepared. I always get very nervous when people are like, I have $10,000, I'm going to invest $10,000. Okay, but there's a lot of these extra costs and a lot of other things that are going to also just pop up. Anybody that's ever closed on a house knows the second you close on a house, something's going to break. Something is going to come up that's going to be that extra cost, and it's really important to make sure that we have that emergency fund. On the other side of it, it's also just the cost of our own mental and physical well-being, okay? I know over the past 2 weeks, going back and forth between lender and attorney and title and realtor and seller and back to the attorney and back to the lender, there has been a lot of work there. To be honest, it has actually prevented me from just doing certain other things I would like to in my life. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while now, you also know that I am pregnant with our first child. And there are others, and that is taking its toll, and that is dealing with also a bunch of emotional and physical things within my own life at this point in time. And sometimes that back and forth can be also exhausting. It's been nice to be able to sit down and go through what those costs were before we even got into contract and say, what are the things that we can outsource? What are the things that I want to make sure I can pay for? Once again, an LLC, for example. I can go and I can create my own LLC, and I could do that much cheaper through the New York State websites, and I can save my money there. But where does that fit within my mental, physical capacity and bandwidth right now? Is it something that I was going to just spend the extra money on to make my life a little bit easier? Or did I have the time and say that I really want to keep my costs down on this? These are all decisions that every single one of us as Lady Landlords gets to be able to make. And I want you to take this list today and really go through that and put a value on those things. Having an attorney, once again, in some states is optional. Is that worth the cost to you? Is that something that you feel comfortable with? Do you even want to use a realtor? Not everybody does. If that's something that you are going to do, think about how does that function and what is that cost and that time of choosing to do that or not, okay? So you might want to go back through, listen to this episode again, write down all of those different points that I kind of went through on my list of expenses here, just so that way you can be prepared and make sure to put that in your deal analysis, okay? If you have not, do make sure to click that follow button where you see my name, or subscribe if you are watching on YouTube or listening to our podcast on Spotify, so you do not miss the next episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. I'm going live also in our Lady Landlords Facebook community every single day through the month of June, sharing my #1 tips for how I grew my rental portfolio to a 7-figure portfolio and bringing in $10K profit in months in under 3 years. So do make sure to follow there. Otherwise, feel free to either put down in the comments, the show notes, let me know if there's any other cost that you've come across that you're always now are saying, oh, that I need to factor in to my deal analysis. It would help so many other lady landlords make sure that they are also picking up the right properties and finding the best deals for them. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next week for the next episode of the Lady Landlords podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Lady Landlords podcast. If you're feeling stuck in your real estate investing journey, visit lady-landlords.com to book a 15-minute orientation call with me and see if you're ready to join our mentorship program. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter and join our Facebook group for exclusive real estate investing tips and offers. Invest with confidence. Become a Lady Landlord today.